Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Pineo, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a 23-year-old woman, and I have glasses and red hair that I'm wearing tied back. I'm wearing a purple shirt with a purple cardigan, and my background is a tan speckled virtual background. I am a white, cisgendered, disabled, late diagnosed autistic woman. As I film this video, I'd like to acknowledge the Susquehannock and their indigenous kin and neighbors on whose traditional territories I live and work. Because my work was undertaken during my studies at the University of Maryland, I would also like to now read the University of Maryland's land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and strength to generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who are the ancestral stewards of this sacred land. It is their historical responsibility to advocate for the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl, and those that swim. They remind us that clean air and pristine waterways are essential to all life. This land acknowledgement is a vocal reminder for each of us as two-leggeds to ensure our physical environment is in better condition than what we inherited, for the health and prosperity of future generations. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about language use and disability in the information classroom. Students learn better in environments where they're comfortable. Using their preferred language and descriptors makes them comfortable and demonstrates respect for them. So it's important that information educators use the preferred language of the students they are teaching. In referring to disability, there are two primary types of phrasing you can use: person-first language and identity-first language. Person-first looks like this: person with a disability. And identity-first looks like this: disabled person. You can also capitalize the D in disabled. Not everyone does. It's a newer choice that some disabled people are making, following in the steps of the deaf, blind, and autistic communities to signify the identity and culture status of being disabled. Person first today is usually seen as medicalizing disability because it separates the person from their disability, whereas identity first is seen as embracing the identity of disabled because it incorporates the state of being disabled as a positive characteristic, like being kind or generous. For example, we say person with cancer, person first, because that's a negative disease to have. But once the person has beaten cancer, they become a cancer survivor, identity first again. Additionally, as you can see from the bar chart presented on this slide from a study conducted by Athar Sharif and his co-authors in 2022, identity-first language is the overall preference of the international surveyed members of the disability community, with 42% of respondents preferring it, 38% preferring person-first language, and 20% having no preference between the two. But this preference has not historically been the case. Person-first language was advocated for in 1959 by Carolyn Bash and Beatrice Wright, both psychologists, for the first time. But it didn't see widespread use until the 1980s when the HIV/AIDS community embraced it. The first use of person-first language occurred in 1988 in an edition of Business Week. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, disabled people, particularly those for whom their disabilities manifested visibly, were largely ostracized from society and either hidden from public view in their families' homes or institutionalized. They were often called monsters, freaks, or morons. That language denied their very humanity. A monster, after all, is almost definitionally not human. The person-first language movement emerged in response to this dehumanizing language as a way of forcing people to literally recognize the person before the disability. The phrasing person with a disability puts the person first. But by the late 1980s and early 1990s, the person-first language movement had overcorrected the issue. Instead of recognizing disabled people's humanity, person-first language had become a way to deny it once again. The separation of person from disability was a way of reminding disabled people that their disability didn't make them less human. But if disabled people had to be reminded of that, then there must be something inherently dehumanizing about disability. In short, person-first language had become a way to remind disabled people that they weren't fully human, and to suggest that being disabled was something so bad that it simply wasn't consistent with being human. In 1999, Jim Sinclair, an autism advocate and founder of Autism Network International, wrote the seminal article in favor of identity first language, aptly titled Why I Dislike Person First Language. In his article, he lays out three arguments against person first language, which I'll list out here. His article focuses on autism, but if you replace the word autism with disability, the ideas become quite clearly related. 1. Saying person with autism suggests that the autism can be separated from the person. It can't. 2. Saying person with autism suggests that even if autism is part of the person, it isn't a very important part. It is. 3. Saying person with autism suggests that autism is something bad, so bad that it isn't even consistent with being a person. That's just not true. By the early 2000s, the disability community was advocating in full force for use of identity first language to describe them. But non-disabled people insisted upon continuing to use person first language in spite of their wishes. This is the pattern we find ourselves in today. Educators in general, including information educators, tend to use person first language, and they are encouraged to do so by the professional bodies, despite disabled people's calls to the opposite. We can see examples of this from the ALA. This is the LibGuide from the American Library Association on available library services to disabled people. It uses person first language throughout, as well as in the ALA created resources it links to. This gives the impression to librarians and other information professionals looking for guidance on language use that this is the language endorsed by the ALA. We also see this type of implicit encouragement from the National Education Association. This post, published in 2022, uses person-first language despite the fact that autistic people have been advocating for decades, like Sinclair was, for use of identity-first language to describe them. This is the closest the NEA gets to a direct statement on language use and disability, which is itself an issue, given that Punsley, the guest writer who wrote this article, is not actually representative of the NEA's views. We also see this type of encouragement on the EduTopia website, which is a blog site that posts classroom suggestions and ideas for educators. In this article, person-first language is directly advocated for. Yet AHEAD, the Association on Higher Education and Disability, gets things right and advocates for use of identity-first language. AHEAD is a professional organization for those involved in disability in higher education, like EDA coordinators, diversity officers, student affairs coordinators, etc. This page is their statement on language, which explains and provides the reasoning behind their movement to identity-first language in their materials. It also gives a well-researched and representative further reading section for those interested in learning more. Information professionals, on the whole, tend to be people who desire the best for their students and users and would not voluntarily use non-preferred language to refer to them. Moreover, the continued encouragement to use person-first language against the wishes of the disability community itself goes against information professionals' professional responsibility not to spread harmful or untrue information, because it implicitly makes an endorsement of incorrect information about a group's preferences. So, what do we do to change this reality? The most important thing we as information educators can do is to use identity-first language. It might be difficult at first, but it's vitally important and incredibly meaningful. On a broader level, there are also implementation plans we can turn to. In order to foster a safe learning environment, the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, a part of the Department of Education, devised a six-step planning process for developing, reviewing, or revising a high-quality school emergency operations plan. These steps were originally put together for use in physical safety preparedness, but they are more than applicable to the concept of language use that we're discussing here. The first step of their plan is to form a collaborative planning team. In an information context, this team might include a classroom staff or the librarians actually doing the teaching, along with non-classroom staff like other reference librarians, administrators, or library personnel. Student representatives are particularly important to this team's success. In the second step, the collaborative planning team works to understand the situation by identifying threats and hazards. For example, in this context, that might be the use of non-preferred language, In order to gain this information, the team can conduct anonymous surveys of both students, instructors, and any other library staff. The third step is for the collaborative planning team to determine goals and objectives for any problems identified in the second step. The goals and objectives should aim to prevent problem behaviors from occurring in the first place, meaning that they address the underlying attitudes of the members of the library community, not just the side effects of those attitudes. The fourth step is to develop a plan or a course of action for accomplishing step three's objectives. According to the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, quote, an important component of this step is to use scenario-based planning to imagine the different ways that a threat or hazard may unfold, and the steps the school and community partners should take to address that threat or hazard, end quote. How specifically will you be addressing non-preferred language use? The fifth step is to put together and share the formal emergency operation plan. This plan explains what the issues identified are, what the plan to address them is, and how the collaborative planning committee plans to work with them on an ongoing basis. Finally, in the sixth step, the emergency operation plan is shared with any involved stakeholders. The stakeholders are trained on their responsibilities, and the plan is implemented. The collaborative planning committee continues to review the plan periodically and to make adjustments or revisions as needed. The School Climate Improvement Group also recommends the following process in order to create safe and supportive learning environments. This is an alternative. First, engage students in the planning process. Engage members of the administration, collect data, implement changes, and engage in ongoing monitoring of the environment in order to ensure that the changes remain successful. These are two suggested approaches, one treating language misuse as an emergency, and the other treating it as an environmental problem. What they both make clear is that the deep systemic changes will need to be made in order to address language use in information education spaces. These are long-term projects, and they'll have to be adapted for each individual institution, but they are more than worthwhile. In the meantime, every information professional can start using identity-first language today. That's an easy first step that is incredibly meaningful to your disabled students. Best of luck, and thank you so much for watching.